tale, welcome the book, ring Christmas bells, merrily ring to all the world. Jesus is King.
Marley was dead. There's no doubt whatsoever about that. The clergyman, the clerk, and the undertaker had all signed the register at her burial. There is no doubt that Marley was dead, and this must be distinctly understood or nothing wonderful can come of the story you're about to hear. So let me tell you one last time. Marley was dead. Did Scrooge know she was dead? Of course she did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and she were business partners for many years. Scrooge was her sole executor, her sole friend, and her sole mourner. But even on the day of Marley's funeral, Scrooge found a way to make it to the office and thought it time well spent. After the funeral, Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name on the sign that hung outside their office. There it stood, years afterward, above the door, reading Scrooge and Marley, as that is how the firm was always known. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge and sometimes Marley, but she answered to both names. It was all the same to her. And in business, as in life, old Scrooge was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel ever struck out a generous fire. She was secret and self-contained, solitary as an oyster. The cold within her froze her old features, nipped her pointed nose, shriveled her cheek, stiffened her steps, made her eyes red, and her thin lips blue. Nobody ever stopped in the street to say with a cheery voice, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored her to bestow a coin. No children greeted her with a wave. No man or woman ever once in all her life dared to smile in the direction of old Miss Scrooge. But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing she liked, to edge her way along the crowded paths of life, keeping all human contact at bay because she wanted none of it. And here we find ourselves, of all the good days in the year, on Christmas Eve. Old Scrooge sat busy in her accounting house. It was cold, bleak, biting weather. The city clocks had only just struck 3. But it was quite dark, and already the fog came pouring in at every chink and keyhole, and was so dense that one might have thought nature was brewing something up on a large scale. The door of Scrooge's office was open so that she might keep her eyes upon her clerk, Bob Cratchit, who worked at a dismal little desk and had only a candle to keep warm. There they sat, working away, when suddenly a visitor arrived.
Merry Christmas, Bob Cratchit.
Merry Christmas, Miss Winifred. Miss Scrooge, it's your niece Winifred.
Merry Christmas to you, Aunt Scrooge.
Bah humbug.
Christmas a humbug. Auntie, you don't mean that, I'm sure.
I do indeed. Merry Christmas. What reason have you to be merry? You're as poor as a field mouse.
And you, Aunt Scrooge, what reason have you to be so morose? You're as rich as the Queen.
Bah humbug.
Don't be cross.
What else can I be when I live in a world of fools? Merry Christmas. What's Christmas? If I could work my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart.
Aunt Scrooge!
Keep Christmas in your own way and let me keep it in mine.
Keep it, but you don't keep it.
Let me leave it alone then, and much good may it do you. Much good has it ever done you.
No good. Christmas is a kind, forgiving, charitable time. The only time in the long calendar year when men and women open their shut-up hearts and think of others with grace and goodwill. And therefore, Aunt Scrooge, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good and will do me good. And I say, God bless it.
Hear, hear, Miss Winifred.
Let me hear another sound from you, Bob Cratchit, and you'll spend your Christmas out on the street.
Don't be angry, Aunt Scrooge. Come, dine with me tomorrow.
Bah humbug! Good afternoon!
Aunt Scrooge, I want nothing from you, and I ask nothing of you. Why can't we be friends?
I said good afternoon!
I am sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute, because we are each other's only family. But I have made my annual attempt in homage to Christmas, and I'll keep my Christmas spirit to the last. So, Merry Christmas, Aunt Scrooge.
Bah humbug!
Scrooge resumed her work, feeling quite pleased with what had just transpired. Meanwhile, the fog and darkness had thickened so that the ancient tower of a church, whose gruff old bell was always peeping down at Scrooge out of a Gothic window in the wall, became invisible, and struck the hours and quarters in the clouds until at length the hour of shutting up the counting house had arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from her stool and declared the office closed. She turned to Bob Cratchit and said,
You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose?
If quite convenient, Miss Scrooge.
It's not convenient, and it's not fair. Why should I pay a day's wages for no work?
It only happens once a year.
A poor excuse for picking a woman's pocket every 25th of December, but I suppose if you must have the whole day, you'll be here all the earlier the next morning.
Certainly, Miss Scrooge.
Be gone with you, then.
Scrooge set off to take her usual melancholy dinner in her usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with her banker's book, she started her journey home. She made her way through the fog and up to her front door. Now on that door hung a very large knocker, a knocker that Scrooge had looked upon many a time without a passing thought. But here, tonight, Scrooge, having just put her key in the lock of the door, looked up and saw not a knocker, but Marley's face. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on its ghostly forehead. The hair was curiously stirred, and though the eyes were wide open, they were perfectly motionless. As Scrooge stared into those eyes, it suddenly was a knocker again. To say that she was not startled would be untrue, but she put her hand upon the key, turned it sturdily, walked in, and lighted her candle. She did pause for a moment before she shut the door, and she did look cautiously behind it first, as if she half expected to see the back of Marley's head sticking out into the hall. But there was nothing on the back of the door except the screws and nuts that held the knocker on. So she closed it with a bang. She checked under the table, under the sofa, under the bed, and found herself to be alone. Quite satisfied, she closed her bedroom door and locked herself in, double locked herself in, which was not her custom. Thus secured against surprise, she took off her cravat, put on her dressing gown, slippers, nightcap, and sat down before the fire. It was a very low fire, so Scrooge drew in close, and as she stared into the fireplace, the rising smoke began to twist and curl into a shape, and suddenly, there it was again, Marley's face!
Humbug!
She quickly leapt from her chair and scurried across the room, and as she did, her glance happened to rest upon a service bell that hung in the room, and it was with great astonishment, and with a strange, inexplicable dread, that as she looked, she saw this bell begin to swing. It swung so softly in the outset that it scarcely made a sound, but it soon rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This might have lasted half a minute, but it seemed an hour. The bells ceased as they had begun, together. They were succeeded by a clanking noise, deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. The cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and then she heard noise much louder on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight toward her door.
It's humbug still! I won't believe it!
The color changed, though, when, without a pause, it passed through the heavy door and hovered in the room. Upon laying eyes on it, Scrooge cried out,
It can't be!
Marley! There she was, in her pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights and boots, but her body was transparent, so that when Scrooge looked upon her, she could see straight through to the bedroom door, and the chain she drew was clasped around her middle. It was long and wound about her like a tail, and it was made of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel.
How now? What do you want with me?
Much.
Who are you?
Ask me who I was.
Who were you then?
In life, I was your partner, Jackie Marley.
No, it can't be! Oh, dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me?
Ebby Scrooge, do you believe in me or not?
I do, I must! But why do you walk the earth and why do you come to me?
I am doomed to wander this earth as a spirit, as witness to that one special thing that I did not share in life, goodwill toward my fellow man. I come to you, Scrooge, because you are on the same path as I.
You are bound by chains, tell me why.
I wear the chains I forged in life, each link created by my greedy and selfish deeds. I'm bound for eternity by these chains. Are you ready for yours, Scrooge?
Oh, Jackie, old Jackie Marley, speak comfort to me, Jackie.
I have none to give. I never cared about anything outside the walls of our accounting house, never ventured beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing table, and now nothing but weary journeys lie before me.
But you were always a good woman of business, Jackie.
Business? Mankind should have been my business. Charity, mercy, and kindness should have been my business. It is at this time of year I suffer most. Why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down, my heart cold, and my fists clutched around coins? Listen to me, Scrooge. My time is nearly gone.
I'm listening, Jackie. I'm listening.
I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance of escaping my fate, but one and one only.
Oh, thank you, Jackie.
You will be haunted by 3 spirits.
Is that the chance you mentioned, Jackie?
It is.
I think I'd rather not.
Without their visits, you cannot hope to avoid the path I tread. Expect the first when the bell tolls 1.
Couldn't I take them all at once and have it over, Jackie?
Expect the second on the next night at the same hour. The third upon the next night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that, for your own sake, you remember what has passed between us.
The apparition walked toward the wall, passed through it, and drifted out into the night. Scrooge followed to the window and looked out. The air was filled with phantoms, wandering hither and thither in restless haste, and moaning as they went. Each one of them wore chains like Marley's ghost. The misery with them all was, clearly, that they had sought to interfere, for good, in human matters, and had lost that power forever. And suddenly, they were gone. Whether these creatures faded into mist or mist enshrouded them, she could not tell, but they and their spirit voices faded together, and the night became as it had been before. Scrooge closed the window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double locked, as she had locked it with her own hands, and the bolts were undisturbed. She tried to say humbug, but stopped at the first syllable, and being from the emotions she had undergone or the fatigues of the day, much in need of repose, went straight to bed without undressing and fell asleep upon the instant.
All hail to the days that merit more praise than all the rest of the year, and welcome the nights that double delights, as well for poor as for peer. Good fortune attend each merry man's friend, that doth but the best that he may, forgetting old wrongs in carols and songs, to drive the cold winter away.
When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark that looking out of bed she could scarcely see anything in her chamber. She was trying to pierce the darkness with her ferret eyes when the chimes on her clock began to call out the hour. To her great astonishment, the bell rang out 12. She remembered that it was well past 2 when she went to bed. The clock had to be wrong. Her mind raced back to Marley's ghost, and she clutched the sheets trying to convince herself that it was all a dream. Scrooge lay in this state until the chimes had gone 3 quarters more, when suddenly she remembered that the ghost had warned her of a visitation when the bell tolled 1. The second seemed like minutes, and the minutes seemed like hours. As the chimes began to sound, old Scrooge's heart thumped heavily in her chest, and at the moment the bell struck 1, a great light flashed up in the room, and the curtains of the bed were drawn aside. Scrooge gasped as she suddenly found herself face to face with the unearthly visitor. It was a strange figure, an ancient being for sure, but sized but like a child. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle in it, and its skin seemed to glow in the darkness. It wore a tunic of the purest white, and round its waist was bound a lustrous belt. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and its dress was trimmed with summer flowers.
Are you the spirit whose coming was foretold to me?
I am.
Who and what are you?
I am the ghost of Christmas past.
What business brought you here?
Your welfare.
Well, I thank you for your visit, but I think the most beneficial thing for my welfare would be a night of uninterrupted sleep.
The rescue of your soul, then. Take heed, Scrooge.
Yes, Spirit. Yes, I will.
Rise and walk with me.
Scrooge did as she was told, and as she took the spirit's hand, they were suddenly transported to an open country road with fields on either side. The city had entirely vanished, and the darkness and the mist had vanished with it, for it was a clear, cold winter day, with snow upon the ground.
Good heaven. I was born in this place. I was a child here.
As Scrooge looked about, she was conscious of 1,000 moments floating in the air, each one connected with 1,000 thoughts and hopes and joys and cares long, long forgotten.
Your lip is trembling. And what is that upon your cheek?
It's nothing.
Do you remember the way?
Remember it? I could walk it blindfolded.
Take heed and remember well. All that you will see are but shadows of the things that have been. They have no consciousness of us.
They walked along the road, with Scrooge recognizing every gate and post and tree, until a little town appeared in the distance, with its bridge, its church, and its school. Children were spilling out into the yard on their way home for the Christmas holiday. All were in great spirits and shouted to each other until the broad fields were so full of merry music that the crisp air laughed to hear it.
Here we come a-wassailing among the leaves so green, and here we come a-wandering so fair to be seen. Love and joy come to you, and to you your wassail too, and God bless you and send you a happy new year, and God send you a happy new year. We are not daily beggars that beg from door to door, but we are neighbors' children who you have seen before. Love and joy come to you, and to you your wassail too, and God bless you and send you a happy new year, and God send you a happy new year. Good master and mistress, as you sit by the fire, pray think of us poor children who wander in the mire. Love and joy come to you, and to you your wassail too, and God bless you and send you a happy new year, and God send you a happy new year. God bless the master of the house, likewise the mistress too, and all the little children that round your table go. Love and joy come to you, and to you your wassail too, and God bless you and send you a happy new year, and God send you a happy new year.
Scrooge looked about and knew and could name every child in the yard. Why was she rejoiced to see them? Why did her cold eyes glisten and her heart leap up as they went past? Why was she filled with gladness when she heard them cry out, "Merry Christmas," as they parted for their several homes? What was Merry Christmas to Scrooge? What good had it ever done to her?
The school is not quite deserted. A solitary child is left there still.
I know.
They left the high road and approached the schoolhouse, past the ornate gates and down the well-remembered lane. They climbed the stairs and entered through the great doors. They went, the ghost and Scrooge, across the hall to a door at the back of the house. It opened before them and disclosed a long, bare, melancholy room filled with stately desks, all but one empty, and at that solitary desk sat a lonely girl reading a book. Upon seeing the girl, Scrooge fell against the wall and wept to see her poor, forgotten self as she used to be.
What is the matter?
I so desperately loved that school, but my family had very little and sacrificed so much just to keep me there. They never had enough to bring me home for Christmas, so when all the others left, it was there I stayed.
Shall we move on?
Yes, please.
Scrooge's former self grew larger at the words, and she was alone again. She was not reading now, but walking up and down despairingly. Scrooge looked at the ghost, and with a mournful shaking of her head, glanced anxiously toward the door. It opened, and in walked the headmistress.
Miss Scrooge,
Yes, ma'am?
I take no pleasure in what I'm about to say, but say it I must. Your time at this school has come to an end.
Come to an end? But how can that be? I make good marks, I'm punctual, my behavior is...
Money. It's a simple matter of money, Miss Scrooge. Your family can no longer afford your tuition, and as such, you no longer have a place at our school.
Please, there must be some way.
It is money that makes this world go round, Miss Scrooge. Learn that lesson and learn it well.
And in a flash, they were now in the busy streets of the city. You could tell by the decoration of the shops that it was Christmas time again, but it was evening, and the streets were lighted up, and they ended up at a certain warehouse door.
Do you know this place?
Know it? When I left school, I was hired here to work in the kitchens, but dear old Fezziwig discovered I had a mind for numbers, and soon I found myself apprenticed in the accounting house. Dear old Fezziwig.
In they went, and at the sight of the dear old lady, Scrooge cried in great excitement,
Bless her heart, it's Fezziwig alive again.
Fezziwig laid down her pen and looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7. She rubbed her hands together with glee and cried out,
Yo-ho there, Ebby, Charles.
Scrooge's former self, now a grown young woman, came briskly in, accompanied by her fellow apprentice, a handsome young man by the name of Charles Wilkins.
Charles Wilkins, to be sure. Bless me, yes, there he is. Oh, dear, sweet Charles.
Yo-ho, my young friends. No more work tonight. It's Christmas Eve. Clear the room. It's time to celebrate.
And away they went. There was nothing they wouldn't have cleared away with old Fezziwig looking on. The floor was swept, the lamps were trimmed, fuel was heaped upon the fire, and the warehouse was turned into a fine banquet hall. In came the rest of the Fezziwig family. In came all the young men and women employed in the business. In came the housemaid, the baker, the cook. In they all came, one after another. Some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came, anyhow and everyhow. And Fezziwig cried out,
Let us have a song.
Wassail all over the town. Our bread it is white and our ale it is brown. Our bowl is made of the mapling tree. So here, my good fellow, I'll drink to thee. Here's to our horse and to his right ear. God send our master a happy new year. A happy new year as e'er he did see. With my wassailing bowl I drink to thee.
And the night continued with great dances and songs, cakes, roast meats, mince pies, and plenty of laughter and joy. When the clock struck 11, the party came to an end. Mrs. and Mr. Fezziwig stood by the door and wished a Merry Christmas upon each head as they drifted out into the night, all content and filled with Christmas cheer.
What a silly thing to spend so much money just to make these simple folks feel joy.
Silly?
She has spent too much.
Too much? You don't understand, Spirit. She doesn't care about the money. As our employer, she has the power to make our jobs bearable or burdensome, a pleasure or toil. Her power lies in her words and looks, her gentle touch, and her understanding. All of those things are so wonderful. They're impossible to add up. The happiness she gives, it is of greater good than any money in the world. I wish...
What is the matter? Speak up.
It's nothing.
It's something, I think.
I wish I could say a word or two to my clerk just now. That's all.
My time grows short. We must move on.
The words produced an immediate effect, for again Scrooge saw herself grow. She was older now, a woman in the prime of life. She was not alone, but sat by the side of a man also in the prime of his life, and in whose eyes there were tears.
Ebby, I fear another love has entered your life and replaced your love for me.
Charles, what love could possibly replace you?
Your love of money.
Don't be ridiculous. We both know it is money that makes this world go round, and we must hold firm to that truth, always. But dear Charles, in no way could money ever replace my love for you.
I've watched as all your other passions have disappeared, and your master passion, money, is all that remains. Can you tell me I'm wrong?
I'm pursuing stability and security. I'm pursuing those things for me and for you, for us. We will find our happiness, but it will take money to make it so. You of all people should understand that. Charles?
We found each other when we were both poor and content to be so. Under Fezziwig's employment, do you remember? We pledged that we would improve our worldly fortune together. But you moved on without me.
I was naive.
You've changed.
No, Charles, I have not.
And your desire to have a family?
Perhaps when there is more money.
My dear, dear Ebby, I fear there will never be enough. I wish you nothing but happiness as you move down your path of life.
Spirit, show me no more. Take me home. Why do you delight in torturing me?
One shadow more.
No more. No more. I don't wish to see it. Show me no more.
But the relentless ghost grabbed her by her arm and forced her to observe what happened next. They were in another place, a room not very large or handsome, but full of comfort. Near the winter fire sat a beautiful young boy. So like the last, Scrooge believed it was the same, until she realized that the boy was now a stately man, sitting opposite his wife and children. The noise in this room was perfectly tumultuous. The children were bounding about, laughing and singing, playing with their Christmas toys and trinkets. The man crossed the room, took the wife in his arms, and kissed her lightly on the forehead. The room was filled with all the riches money could never buy: kindness and warmth, family, love. The wife looked up at the husband and said,
Charles, I saw an old friend of yours this afternoon.
Oh? Who was it?
Guess.
How can I know? How should I know?
Ebby Scrooge.
Ebby Scrooge? Now there's a name that hasn't crossed my mind in many years.
I passed her office window this morning, and there she was, huddled over a little candle, frantically scratching away at her ledger. Her partner lies upon the point of death, I hear, and there she sat, alone. Quite alone in the world, I do believe.
That's enough. Remove me from this place.
I told you these were shadows of the things that have been, that they are what they are. Do not blame me.
Leave me. Take me back. Haunt me no longer.
And with that, the spirit vanished. Scrooge found herself alone in her room, waving her arms wildly and gasping for breath. Suddenly aware of her extreme fatigue, she barely had time to reel to bed before she sank into a deep and heavy sleep.
'Tis ill for a mind to anger inclined, to think of small injuries now. If wrath be too thick, do not on your cheek, nor let her inhabit thy brow. Cross out of thy books malevolent looks, both beauty and youth decay, and wholly consort with mirth and sport to drive the cold winter away.
Scrooge bolted upright just as the clock struck 1. The chimes sounded as she quickly looked about, afraid she had been transported, but found she was still in her own room. Her own room indeed, but it had undergone a surprising transformation. Crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy hung all about, and a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney. Heaped upon the floor, to form a kind of throne, were turkeys, geese, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, and seething bowls of punch. And there, sitting upon a couch, was a jolly giant, glorious to see in both size and spirit, who bore a glowing torch to shed its light on Scrooge.
Hello, my good woman. I am the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me.
Scrooge did so, and saw the spirit clothed in a simple green robe bordered with white fur. On its head it wore no other covering than a holly wreath. Its dark brown curls were long and free as its genial face, sparkling eye, and joyful air.
You have never seen the like of me before.
No, indeed I have not. Spirit, why do you bring such a bounty?
To remind those with much that there are many in desperate need.
A great many?
More and more with each passing year.
And I am to go with you, to see these things?
Yes.
Well then, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night and learned a lesson, which I believe I learned well. Tonight, if you have any lessons to teach, let me be your humble student.
Touch my robe.
The room vanished, and they found themselves out in the city streets. It was a crisp, clear Christmas morn, and the air was full of cheer. The last-minute shoppers darting in and out of the different markets, delighted and teased by pot-bellied baskets of chestnuts, pears, and apples clustered high in blooming pyramids, candied cakes spotted with molten sugar, and fat geese, and rib roasts waiting to be wrapped, tied, and sent home to roast.
Why, this isn't a picture of need.
And if only this world were available to all. Touch my robe.
And as she did, Scrooge found herself in many places at once. in back alleys where people were sleeping under piles of rags, peering in cracked windows of rickety shacks as those inside settled into pots of thin soup, in the basements and workrooms of grand mansions as staff polished, swept, folded, and scooped far away from their families on Christmas Day, and at last outside the meager and simple dwelling of her clerk, Bob Cratchit, and his family. And there was Mrs. Cratchit and her children bustling about to make final preparations before Bob and Tim arrived.
Hurry, children. Your father and Tim will be home any minute.
And just as the words were spoken, in came Bob with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas, for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch and had his limbs supported by an iron frame. Bob set him off his shoulder, and he went off to clean up before supper.
And how did little Tim behave?
As good as gold and better. Somehow he gets thoughtful sitting by himself so much and thinks the most wonderful things you've ever heard. He told me on our way to church that he wanted to give his Christmas farthing to charity, as there were many others that needed it more than he.
Bob's voice was tremulous when he told them this, and trembled more when he said that Tiny Tim was growing stronger by the day. His active little crutch was heard upon the floor, and back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his stool at the table.
Mother, is it time?
Yes, it is.
Mrs. Cratchit had scrimped and stretched ingredients that in any other house would have fed just two into a glorious feast that would serve the whole Cratchit family. There was a small goose, a dollop or two of mashed potatoes, a bit of applesauce, a touch of stuffing, and a simple Christmas pudding.
My dear children, look at this feast that your mother has prepared.
Feast? Why, there's hardly anything there. That can't be the lot of it. Where's the rest?
They have only what they can afford. But look at how grateful they are.
And then, with absolute delight, the Cratchits set in upon the feast, savoring every morsel and every moment, the walls ringing with laughter and good cheer. And when finally the dinner was done, Bob Cratchit cried out,
"A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us."
God bless us, everyone.
Tim sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool. Bob held his withered little hand in his, as if the moment would never end.
Spirit, tell me if Tiny Tim will live.
I see a vacant seat at the table, and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die.
No, no! Kind Spirit, say he will be spared!
If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, none other will find him there.
Miss Scrooge, here's to Miss Scrooge, the founder of our feast.
The founder of the feast, indeed. I wish I had her here. I'd give her a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I'd hope she'd have a good appetite for it.
My dear, it's Christmas Day.
It could only be Christmas Day on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling woman as Miss Scrooge. You know she is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you.
Please, my dear, now is not the time.
Oh, my dear, sweet husband, I'll drink her health for your sake, not for hers. A long life to her and a Merry Christmas. She'll be very merry with all her money, I have no doubt.
It is time for us to move on. Take my robe.
And as Scrooge did, she found they were in the parlor of her niece, in the middle of a rollicking Christmas party.
She didn't say that. I don't believe it.
Oh, yes, she did. I was standing right there when Aunt Scrooge said, "Christmas, bah humbug," and she believed it, too.
Then shame on her, Winifred.
Yes, she's not as pleasant as she could be, but I will say nothing against her.
And she's very rich. At least you always tell me so.
She is indeed, but her wealth is of no use to her. She doesn't do any good with it. She doesn't make herself comfortable with it. She hasn't the satisfaction of thinking it will ever benefit family or friends.
I would have no patience with her.
But I do. I feel sorry for her, as her suffering comes from her own ill wills. She takes it into her head to dislike me and refuses an invitation to my table, and what's the consequence? She loses out on a lovely dinner and on an opportunity to spend time with her only family. She may rail at Christmas till she dies, but there I'll be, year after year, walking through her door with an honest invitation and a heart full of Christmas cheer.
You're a good woman, Winifred. We all should be so lucky to have one such as you in our lives.
A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you, Aunt Scrooge, wherever you may be.
My time grows short. We must be off.
Are spirits' lives so short?
My life upon this globe is very brief. It ends tonight.
Tonight? Oh, dear spirit.
Remember, Scrooge. Remember all that you have witnessed. what will you do as one who has so much?
And with that, the spirit was gone. Scrooge wheeled about in shock, but suddenly she remembered the prediction of old Jackie Marley, and lifting up her eyes, beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground toward her.
This time of the year is spent in good cheer, and neighbors together do meet, to sit by the fire with friendly desire, each other in love for to greet. Old grudges forgot are put in the pot, all sorrows aside they may lay. The old and the young do carol this song, to drive the cold winter away.
The phantom silently approached. The very air through which the spirit moved seemed filled with gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment, which concealed its head, its face, and its form.
I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come.
The spirit answered not.
You are about to show me shadows of the things yet to come. Is that so, spirit?
Again, there was no answer. Scrooge feared the silent spirit so much that her legs trembled, and she felt a vague, uncertain horror.
Ghost of the future, I fear you more than any of the others I have seen. But as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another woman from what I was, I am prepared to bear your company, and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me?
It gave her no reply, but simply lifted its long, dark sleeve and pointed forward.
Lead on, spirit, lead on.
The phantom began to move, and Scrooge followed. They found themselves in the heart of the city, out amongst the people, all moving through their daily lives. The spirit stopped beside one little group engaged in conversation and pointed a hand toward them. Scrooge approached so she could hear them speak.
Well, I don't know much about it either way. I only know she's dead.
When did she die?
Last night, I believe.
Why? What was the matter with her? I thought she would never die.
God knows.
What has she done with her money?
I haven't heard.
Left it to her company, perhaps. She hasn't left it to me. That's all I know.
It's likely to be a very cheap funeral, and upon my life, I don't know of anyone who would go to it. Suppose we should make up a party and volunteer?
I wouldn't mind going if lunch was provided.
Spirit, of whom do they speak?
The phantom remained silent and glided down the street. It stopped by two business people in a meeting.
I know those two. Persons of business they are. Very wealthy and of great importance. I made it a point to always stand well in their esteem.
How are you?
Just fine, I suppose. And how are you?
The same, I suppose. Did you hear that old Scratch finally got her own at last?
So I am told. Bit of a chill in the air today.
Seasonable for Christmas time, don't you think?
I suppose.
I'll see you at the tavern later on, then.
I suppose.
And with that, their conversation was over. Scrooge was surprised that the spirit would want her to hear things so trivial, as they had nothing to do with her. She looked about for her own image, and even though the clock pointed to her usual time of day for being there, she saw no likeness of herself among the multitudes that hustled about the streets. Without warning, the phantom began to move, and Scrooge hurried to keep alongside it. They left the busy street and moved to an obscure part of town, where the streets were foul and narrow, the shops and houses wretched, and the inhabitants reeked of crime, filth, and misery. They stopped at a resale shop, where most anything and everything could be bought or sold. No one ever questioned the origin of the household materials, clothing, and finery stacked upon the shelves, and no explanation was ever given. And there, sitting amongst the wares, was a gray-haired rascal, nearly 70 years of age, smoking her pipe in all the luxury of calm retirement. Scrooge and the phantom entered the shop, just as a woman with a heavy bundle did the same, and she had scarcely entered when another woman, similarly laden, came in too.
Well, what do you know? The maid and the laundress come a-visiting together. I wonder why.
Oh, that's enough from you, Joe. A person has a right to make a little extra money when the opportunity presents itself.
Indeed they do. You'll never hear me say a word about it.
This one here, if she wanted to keep it all, perhaps she should have been friendlier in her lifetime. If she had, there would have been somebody looking after her when she was struck with death, instead of laying there alone as she gasped out her last breath.
It's the truest word that was ever spoke. It's a judgment on her. Now, what have you got?
The maid threw her bundle on the floor. It contained a pewter pencil case, a pair of sleeve buttons, 2 silver teaspoons, and a pair of sugar tongs. They were severely examined and appraised by old Joe and added up into a total.
There's what I'll give you, and not a penny more.
It ain't much, but I guess neither was she. I'll take it.
And now undo my bundle, Joe.
Joe went down on her knees for the greater convenience of opening it, and having unfastened a great many knots, dragged out a large and heavy roll of fabric.
What do you call this? Bed curtains?
Yes, they're her bed curtains.
You don't mean to say you took them down, rings and all, with her lying there?
Yes, I do, and why not?
You're a clever one indeed.
They were there for the taking, so I took them. Now be careful, Joe. Don't drop that oil upon the blankets.
Her blankets?
Who else's do you think? She isn't likely to take cold in the state she's in.
I hope she didn't die of anything catching.
Don't you be afraid of that. I wasn't so fond of her company that I'd loiter about her for such things if she did.
Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror, as Joe tallied up her contributions and tossed her a few coins.
There it is. This is the end of it, you see. She frightened everyone away from her when she was alive to profit us when she was dead.
Spirit, I see. The case of this unhappy woman might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heaven, what is this?
The scene had shifted away from the dingy old shop, and Scrooge and the ghost were now standing in a bedchamber. Scrooge recoiled in terror as she almost touched a bed, a bare, uncurtained bed, and on it, covered with a simple sheet, was the body of a woman. Scrooge glanced toward the phantom. Its steady hand was pointed to the head. The sheet was so carelessly adjusted that the slightest raising of it, the motion of a finger upon Scrooge's part, would have disclosed the face.
You want me to pull back the sheet and look upon the face? I won't do it. Do you hear me? I won't.
Still, the ghost pointed with an unmoved finger to the head.
Spirit, this is a fearful place. In leaving it, I shall not leave its lesson. Trust me, please let us go.
The spirit stood motionless and looked upon her.
If there is any person in this town who feels any emotion caused by this woman's death, show that person to me. Spirit, I beseech you.
The phantom spread its dark robe before her like a wing, and when it was pulled back, they stood in the room of an anxious young man and his young bride.
Is it good or bad?
Good.
She had relented?
No.
I don't understand. If she doesn't relent, there's no hope.
She is past relenting. She is dead.
Dead? So what does that mean? To whom will all debt be transferred?
I don't know. But before that time, we shall be ready with the rent money. And even if we aren't, our next landlord could never be as heartless and cold as she was. We may sleep tonight with light hearts, Caroline.
Spirit, please. I ask for tenderness, and this is what you show me? There must be some tenderness connected with a death.
Without word, the ghost swept her through several streets, and soon they stood before the house of poor Bob Cratchit. And there they found Mrs. Cratchit and her children seated around the fire. It was quiet, and all the children were as still as statues as they sat about the room. The silence was broken by the sound of Bob Cratchit coming in through the door.
How was it then, Robert?
It was lovely, dear. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is, but you'll see it often. I promised him that we'd walk there every Sunday.
Oh, Bob. Poor old Bob. Spirit, I know our parting moment is at hand, but before you go, I must know the woman we saw lying in her bed.
The spirit pointed behind Scrooge, and when she turned, she found herself in a graveyard. Here, then, the wretched woman whose name she was about to discover lay underneath the ground. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one.
Before I draw near to that stone to which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of things that will be, or are they shadows of things that may be?
Still the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which it stood.
Yes, Spirit, I will look.
Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as she went, and following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave her own name, Ebby Scrooge.
I am the woman who will lay upon the bed?
The finger pointed from the grave to her and back again.
No, Spirit, oh no! I am not the woman I was. I've changed. I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me I may sponge away the writing on this stone.
In her agony, she tried to catch the spirit's hand, but it had shrunk, collapsed, and Scrooge found herself clutching to a bedpost.
When Christmas is tide comes in like a bride with holly and ivy clad, 12 days in the year, much mirth and good cheer in every household is had. The contrary guise is then to devise some gambols of Christmas play, whereat the young men do the best that they can to drive the cold winter away.
Yes, the bedpost was her own. The bed was her own. The room was her own. Best and happiest of all, the time before her was open to make amends.
I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. The shadows of the things that would have been may still be changed. They will be, I know they will.
She was so fluttered and so glowing with her good intentions, she began to spin about the room.
I don't know what to do. I'm as light as a feather. I'm as happy as an angel. I am as merry as a schoolgirl. But what day is it? Did I miss it? I don't know how long I've been among the spirits.
Running to the window, she opened it and put out her head. Scrooge spied a young lass down on the street and cried out,
"Hello, young lady. If you please, what is today?"
Today? Why, it's Christmas Day.
It's Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. They can do anything they like. Of course they can. Of course they can. Young lady.
Yes?
Do you know the butcher's market right around the corner?
Indeed I do, ma'am.
Do you know whether they've sold their prize turkey that was hanging up in their window?
The one as big as me?
Yes, the one as big as you.
It's hanging in there now.
Excellent. Go buy it and tell them I'll be by shortly with the delivery address.
Yes, ma'am.
I'll send it to Bob Cratchit. Oh, what a surprise that'll be. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim.
Scrooge dressed herself in all her best and headed out into the streets. The people were pouring forth, and Scrooge regarded everyone with a delighted smile. She looked so pleasant that a great many people greeted her with, "Good morning, ma'am, a Merry Christmas to you." And Scrooge often said afterwards that of all the blithe sounds she had ever heard, those were the blithest in her ears. She stopped by the butcher's market to give them Bob's address and quickly moved on to her intended destination.
Winifred, please open the door.
Why, bless my soul, Aunt Scrooge.
I have come to dinner. That is, if I'm still welcome. May I come in, Winifred?
Of course. Oh, my dear Aunt Scrooge, how wonderful it is to see you.
And how wonderful it is to see you, my dear niece. I promise to never be a stranger again.
The merrymaking and delight lasted well into the evening, but that didn't stop Scrooge from arriving early at the office the next morning. She had her heart set upon catching Bob Cratchit's late arrival, and she did it. Yes, she did. The clock struck 9. No Bob. A quarter past. No Bob. When he arrived, he was a full 18 minutes behind his time.
Hello, Bob Cratchit.
Hello, Miss Scrooge.
What do you mean by coming here at this time of day?
I'm very sorry, ma'am. I know I'm late.
Yes, you most definitely are.
It only happens once a year, ma'am, and it shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, ma'am.
Now, I'll tell you what, Bob Cratchit. I'm not going to stand for this sort of thing any longer. And therefore, I'm about to raise your salary.
What? Excuse me?
A Merry Christmas, Bob. A merrier Christmas than I have ever given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary, and I'll do all that I can to assist your struggling family. How does that sound, Bob?
Oh, Miss Scrooge, thank you so much.
Scrooge was better than her word. She did it all and infinitely more. To Tiny Tim, who did not die, she became a great friend. To all of mankind, as a good person the world has ever known. She had no further interaction with the spirits, and it was always said of her that she knew how to keep Christmas well. May that be truly said of all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone.
We wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Good tidings we bring to you and your kin. Good tidings for Christmas and a Happy New Year. Now bring us a figgy pudding, now bring us a figgy pudding, now bring us a figgy pudding, now bring it out here. Good tidings we bring to you and your kin. Good tidings for Christmas and a Happy New Year. For we all like figgy pudding, for we all like figgy pudding, for we all like figgy pudding, now bring it out here. Good tidings we bring to you and your kin. Good tidings for Christmas and a Happy New Year. We won't go until we get some, we won't go until we get some, we won't go until we get some, now bring it out here. Good tidings we bring to you and your kin. Good tidings for Christmas and a Happy New Year. We wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.